the NAC gaining 0.1%. In terms of the fact that we saw the day before hitting a 7-month low, do you think this is a sign that we could see things turning around, or do you think that perhaps more negativity will come through to the markets?
Well, I think it's too early to make that kind of call. It was positive that we had a positive, we had gains in the market yesterday, and that should sort of provide some kind of psychological support for the market. It's really been a banking story in the declines that we've seen over the past 2 months. Some of the other sectors still have their valuations, their PEs in the high teens and even in the early 20s. But the banks have suffered, and any kind of trading that suggests that that is coming to an end will probably be a positive factor for the banks going forward. But as I said, it's probably too early to make the call that it's all over. But we're hopeful, and we think this will be perhaps draw the line with underneath these heavy declines we've seen recently.
Well, Chibuzo, it seems that the banking sector is still topic of conversation, top of the agenda, and Amcon, of course, also being under the spotlight. We had the president, Goodluck Jonathan, asking former Goldman Sachs investment banker Mustafa Chike-Obi to run Amcon. How has this news been taken by the investor community?
Well, the factors around Amcon have been one of the major drivers behind the declines we've seen in the banks, the uncertainty surrounding the Amcon and also the sale of the troubled banks. And that was because expectations were a bit overblown prior to the declines, and what people were expecting Amcon, the role people were expecting Amcon to play didn't seem to materialize going from the CBN's utterances. So I think we've come to the stage where any positive news in the Amcon direction will probably be supportive for the banks and for the market in general. But I'm not very familiar with the individual Chike-Obi. It's good that he's an investment banker that seems to fit the role. But I think the CBN governor made an important comment recently, which to the effect that the technical teams who are the ones going to be involved in actually settling a lot of the issues surrounding the Amcon and the sale of the banks are already at work. And really the board itself should not be the major focus. Really, when we see those deals coming through and we see what kind of deals are being made and to what extent that they resolve the issues that investors are troubled about, then I think we can take it from there. I'll really wait till that happens before I put a positive reading to that appointment.
Well, exactly, because I think most investors out there waiting to hear more news about the potential bidders for some of those rescued banks. There's also a lot of concern in terms of who would want to buy these very, very troubled banks. Some say that the second-tier Nigerian banks are far more attractive. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it depends on the goal of the buyer. Some want a foothold and they want to be able to benefit from the spread that some of the bigger banks had already. It's really a valuation issue. When the talks begin and the deals are made, I think investors who are in the best position to know what they want out of the deal should be able to pick amongst all the available choices. And I don't think anybody's in a position to say that some banks are, or some categories of banks are more attractive than others. It depends on the way their books are. It depends on how Amcon resolves the issues relating to the individual banks, and it also depends on what the individual investors themselves want.
Well, you know, looking at the trends that we've been seeing in Nigeria and the whole of Africa, we have been seeing a bit of consolidation coming through. We've also heard news that a Guarantee Trust Bank is in talks to buy a bank in Francophone West Africa. Your view on this, and of course it is about expansion and heading into new territories. Do you think that this news perhaps makes GT Bank even more attractive?
Well, GT Bank has been attractive in terms of how it's run its operations and how it managed to navigate some of the crises we've seen in recent past. But I've never really been able to understand the push towards going into the Francophone countries and other African-based expansion. And not that it's not good in the long run, but I'm not clear as to what the strategy is for those banks. The trade between Nigeria, for instance, and many of the Francophone countries isn't very much, and the markets are not big. You have in Nigeria where only roughly 20% of bankable individuals actually benefit from banking services, and you would think that they would try and consolidate on their local markets first. But then I guess the GTB board is in a better position and they have all the information they need. But I'm not particularly excited about that news for what it's worth. I think what's happening here is of greater interest to me.
Or which are your bank stock picks? We spoke a little earlier, you were talking about GT Bank, Zenith, Sky and Fidelity. We've got the third quarter results coming up relatively soon, the third quarter almost behind us. Who do you think is going to outperform?
Well, first thing we need to realize is that the banking terrain is changing, and we're seeing significant change already, and we're probably going to see more going forward with all the regulatory actions and also some of the policy initiatives the CBN has initiated recently. Now, I think there are several key pointers to success for a bank. The first is, I think they have to be creative in terms of getting their products across. As I said, the banking services don't have very much penetration in this economy. And that's because I don't think the banks have really had the incentive to push their products out. They've really, for instance, during the crisis, we saw them putting money into the equity markets. That's not banking. You want banks that understand their business, have very good structures in terms of credit monitoring, in terms of creating loans and getting business out there in terms of expanding their market share. You also want banks that have very good risk management practices, and from the crisis we've seen those who are weak, and we've actually seen banks like GTB, Zenith, come out relatively unscathed. Also, we need to see banks that are forward-looking, also banks that have spread, because in the corporate segment, which has been the mainstay for many of the banks, it's getting tighter, and corporate bond market is also beginning to open up. Ironically, it's the banks that are leading that charge in that direction, but you see corporates having more options in terms of borrowing, and it doesn't really bode well for the banks in general, but those who are better prepared to take on those challenges should benefit. And that's why they have to be creative, and they have to look beyond their traditional lines of business as they have practiced so far.